the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to Connecticut.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Wednesday night edition of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody is having a great day. And it's funny, first of all, we got ourselves a jam-packed show today. I can't believe how much there is to talk about here in the middle of May. But it's funny, we came into this week thinking that we were going to do 3 shows, no Sunday show. We'll do a Monday show. Then we'll come back on Wednesday and Thursday. Had no idea that on Tuesday, an SEC football coach was going to get sued by one of his former recruits, okay? So we couldn't do the show Tuesday reacting to the Billy Napier stuff, but we will get into what I think is one of the craziest stories that I can remember in recent college sports history, as Billy Napier and the Florida Gators are getting sued by Jaden Rashada. So that is where we'll lead the show. Busy show, fun show. Here's what you need to know about today's show. We'll open Billy Napier. What the heck happened? What do you need to know? What are the details? And why I believe that Billy Napier is trending towards, frankly, one of the worst coaching hires maybe in the history of college football. That sounds insane, but when you break it down, it is fact. From there, very interesting. It is Wednesday night. We are 1 week away from the NBA draft deadline. In other words, the day in which you have to remove your name from the NBA draft if you want to return to college basketball. So maybe later this week, we'll talk about some of the big names, the big stay or go decisions. But today, what I want to talk about is who is still in the portal, who could come back to college basketball, and also where I think they are going to end up. So we'll talk about Coleman Hawkins. We'll talk a little bit about some guys that we haven't hit on very much. Jalen Wells, Cam Christie, maybe even a little Jackson Robinson or Chaz Lanier update as college hoops portal season is coming to a close. Speaking of which, a quick thought on DJ Wagner. What is going on with that guy? Looking for some updates, some details on him. And we'll wrap with a couple odds and ends. Arizona and UCLA playing in basketball even after the breakup of the Pac-12, yet somehow it's not a home and home. I'm fired up. The college football playoff is headed to TNT. That's certainly an interesting twist. And oh, by the way, we did get announced on Wednesday that come this fall, we will have Friday night college football on Fox. Fired up about that. Before we get started, a couple quick things. First of all, as always, make sure you're subscribed to the Aaron Torres Pod and Aaron Torres Pod YouTube page. If you're watching on YouTube, click that little subscribe button. Make sure to turn on notifications so you know when we're going live. And of course, you know when we'll post clips and videos from this show. Also, if you listen on Apple or Spotify, make sure to subscribe there as well. If you want to do your boy Torres a solid, go ahead and make sure to subscribe on Apple and Spotify, and also leave a 5-star rating and review. Would appreciate that. Also, make sure, as always, to drop your questions in. I know it's mid-May. I know things are moving a little bit slower in the world of college sports, but drop your questions in for producer Matt. We are going to get to them at the end of the show. So I appreciate everybody's support. We got a nice crowd here on a Wednesday in the middle of May. But with that said, there is no more time to waste. So how about this? Let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, as I told you just a short time ago, what did I say? I said it is not often that we get a really big story of really big consequence in mid-May. And it's funny because Tuesday night I could not record. I was actually prepping some stuff for when producer Matt and we will be off, not next week, but the week after, first full week of June. I will be traveling. I will be on a beach, mimosas, whatever. But I was preparing some stuff thinking we won't go live on Thursday, but let's be honest. What does it really matter? What kind of story, or Tuesday, what story could possibly break on a Tuesday in mid-May. Then I wake up. Then, in what was clearly an orchestrated media blitz, because ESPN, On3, 24/7 Sports all had it at the same time, Billy Napier and the Florida Gators football program is being sued by former 4 to 5-star quarterback, depending on what recruiting service you looked at, Jaden Rashada. This story is wild. And so I want to go ahead and dive in because I have a lot of thoughts on this. But the theme of what I want to talk about is pretty straightforward. One, I want to tell you what you need to know. But then two, and this is as important, I want to explain why I believe that, frankly, Billy Napier, in my opinion, might just be, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, quite possibly the worst college football hire that I can personally ever remember. That sounds like hyperbole, but I don't think it is when I lay it out for you. First of all, details of the story. And what is the story again? An SEC football coach being sued by a former recruit. Okay. So Jaden Rashada, it's funny because I actually remember talking quite a bit about this story as it happened in real time. Really 3, 4, 5 different updates as far as the Jaden Rashada stuff was concerned. First off, even the summer going into his senior year was kind of weird. He was trending towards Florida. Then he goes to Miami. He commits to Miami. Florida fans freak out. They're not happy with Billy Napier. This is before he has ever coached a game, by the way, at Florida. Florida fans aren't happy with Billy Napier. They're trying to figure out what's going on. It's clearly NIL. Miami dropped a bag, whatever. Then, of course, a few months later, in the middle of the season, mid-October, Jaden Rashada flips from Miami back to Florida, and all seems well. That is until National Signing Day, when there's a weird situation even on National Signing Day. If you remember, Billy Napier had to postpone his press conference on National Signing Day because of the fact that Jaden Rashada had not sent in his letter of intent. And so basically Jaden Rashada was kind of the crown jewel of the class. And basically Billy Napier didn't want to go to the podium and not be allowed to talk about the best recruit in his class because, again, you can't talk about a recruit until they are officially signed with your program. So that happens. And then from there, Jaden Rashada signs. Jaden Rashada is announced as part of the Florida Gators class of 2022, I believe it was. And then, oh, by the way, of course, just weeks and days after he is announced as part of the class of 2022, Jaden Rashada, it ultimately turns out he does not enroll at Florida. He does not show up at Florida. The Florida Gators release him from his letter of intent, and he goes to Arizona State. So that was what we knew at the time. Then, after all of that, The Athletic does the huge story, the huge expose on everything that happened in the recruitment. And really, I'm not going to go through the whole Athletic situation, but they got basically the contract that he was supposed to sign with Florida, and frankly, maybe even a contract that he did sign. They just never paid him for it. And the contract that The Athletic came up with, how about this? Jaden Rashada, who was not even like the best quarterback in that class, that was the same class as Arch Manning, a couple other guys. Jaden Rashada was supposed to get $13 million. I sound like Dr. Evil. $13 million from Florida as part of that deal with the collective. It ends up falling apart, but The Athletic gets that contract. And so basically he was supposed to get $13 million. He ends up going to Arizona State. He gets none. And that was kind of the end of it. He goes to Arizona State. He plays a little bit as a freshman. And as it turns out, he actually transfers this offseason to Georgia. Kind of a little bit under the radar. If you follow college football, if you have a lot of interest in the sport of college football, then you kind of see he ends up at Georgia. It's one of those situations where he will back up Carson Beck this year and then be in position to replace him next year. So that was where we were at with Jaden Rashada. That is all of the background until Tuesday morning when we find out that Rashada is actually suing Florida and Billy Napier over basically everything that I've told you. And I'm not going to give you every single detail from the lawsuit. But essentially what you need to know is this. Remember when Johnny would get a new this, or Billy would take a vacation, or Stevie would do that, and your parents would come back and you say, Mom, I want that new pair of sneakers. I want this. I want that. I want blah, blah, blah. And what will your parents say? Just because Johnny has it, just because Billy has it, just because Stevie has it, doesn't mean that you need it. And what they would always tell you is sometimes in life, when something seems too good to be true, it often is. And that's really how I feel about this Jaden Rashada situation. Because essentially why he is suing Florida, and I think rightly so, is because basically everything that he was promised during his recruitment, Florida did not deliver on from a financial perspective. And so what Jaden Rashada is basically saying is that essentially that what he was promised cost him other NIL opportunities at other schools. And so he feels like, you know what, I'm suing for lost wages essentially at other schools. And so what did Florida offer? Why is he suing right now? Well, first off, there's a few things. One, as I said, he originally committed to Miami. As we found out, Miami basically gave him $150,000 right around the time of his commitment. So that ends up happening. When he flips his commitment from Florida to Miami, Florida promises him $500,000 to flip. In other words, basically, after he commits to Miami, he takes a couple visits to Florida, and Florida's basically director of player personnel basically says, Rashada family, what do we need to do to make this happen? What do we need to do to get you to be a Florida Gator? What do we need to do to get you to be in that orange and blue? And the family, gives them a number, whatever. And they say, okay, no problem. We'll give you $500,000. Well, it never comes. Then as we get towards signing day, as I said, Billy Napier, weird signing day because they're waiting for Jaden Rashada's letter of intent to come in. It never does. And basically the reason why is for two reasons. The Rashada family never got the $500,000, and the contract that they were promised that would owe him $13 million also doesn't show up. And so basically the Rashadas are like, dude, what are we doing? We're not signing anything. Then here is the crazy part. How about this? Billy Napier personally, according to the lawsuit, gets on the phone with his player personnel guy, the guy that already promised him $500,000 that never came, and says, this is the head coach. This is an SEC head coach, Billy Napier. Tells the Rashada family, I personally guarantee you we will get you $1 million ASAP, but we need you to sign today. Head coach gets on the phone, promises $1 million. They sign, and the money never comes. And so essentially, again, this is why Jaden Rashada is suing. It is because he had an offer from Miami on the table. Now that's reported to be about $9.5 million, which is crazy in its own right. But basically the Rashadas are like, we lost out on all this money because you promised us money that never came. And as we found out as part of this lawsuit, how about this? The Rashadas, the only money they ever received from Florida, remember they were promised $13 million. All they ever got was $150K, and that was to repay what Miami had already paid him. So essentially they gave him $150K to give to Miami to essentially get out of his NIL contract there. Comes to Florida or commits to Florida, signs with Florida, never gets a dime. And so the Rashada family said, enough is enough. We're suing you because this is nonsense and we lost out on a lot of money. So those are the details. I know it took me 15 minutes just to get the details out, but they were important. And what I want to do now is talk about the consequences of what this all means for Florida, what it all means for the future of NIL. But let me start by saying this. I think really I have two big takeaways about this. The first is that this confirms something I thought about NIL, but then I want to get into Napier, okay? So first off, my first thought is this finally answers a question that I had about NIL basically from the second that NIL started. Over the last couple of years, you would read a lot of stories about players or collectives or whatever, and players were promised a certain amount and they wouldn't get it. And so players would be offered $800K to sign at XYZ school. And then you'd find out they got 100 or 80,000 or 70,000 or whatever. or they'd be offered $80K and get $10,000, whatever it was. But I kept hearing all these stories about all of these different deals falling through and players not getting what they agreed to. And I kept asking all of my sources in college sports, I kept saying, can you explain to me how that is? Like basically, if I work for Fox Sports and I sign a contract and they promise, let's just use round numbers. They promise to pay me $100,000 a year to host a radio show Monday through Friday, or ESPN or NBC or whatever. I'm just using Fox, but whatever. If I sign a contract where they promise $100,000 and I live up to my end of the contract, I show up every day, I'm responsible, I'm ready to go, they have to pay me whether I have the best show in the world or the worst show in the world. And so I've never understood, how can these collectives just not pay what they promise? And this kind of answers it. They can't, and Jaden Rashada is the first of what I believe will be a lot of lawsuits. Now, ultimately, I don't know how many there will be, but I think we'll see more, because you can't just promise, you can't just get kids to leave a good situation for your situation, or you can't just get kids on your campus by saying, we're going to offer you X, Y, Z and not deliver. Now, you can do it on the field. You can say, I'm going to offer you a starting spot, whatever, football, basketball, baseball, whatever. But when it comes to monetary stuff, if you sign a contract, you have to, be good on that contract. And so I never understood, even when the basketball portal really kind of picked up over the last couple months, I started asking people, like, how can a school just offer a kid $250K or $500K or $2 million like Great O support? Like, you have to deliver. And so this explains, and I think this is the first of what will be not just one, quote LeBron, not one, not two. I think we're getting a lot of lawsuits here in the coming years because these collectives in many cases are not living up to their end of the bargain. But two, from the football perspective, let me say this. Billy Napier is a disaster. And it's funny, everybody thinks, oh, Torres doesn't like certain people in the industry, and Torres is critical, and Torres is this, and Torres is that. No. But Billy Napier is an abject disaster. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody about this, but sometimes when stuff is happening in real time, you don't realize the historic significance around it. It can be a positive or a negative. I'll give you a positive example. I remember during UConn's NCAA tournament run this year, a buddy of mine, Nick Coffey, hosts, radio in Louisville. He texted me, he's like, Torres, I hope you're enjoying this Dan Hurley stuff. Dan Hurley is going to go down as one of the great coaches in the history of college basketball. He said people don't see it now because it's happening in real time, but he will. And so this isn't a UConn Dan Hurley conversation, but it kind of struck me. It's like, yeah, because we're living in the moment, we don't really realize just how great Dan Hurley is. But the inverse is, I don't think people realize how bad Billy Napier is in real time relative to what the Florida historic standard is. And the crazy thing is, this is the thing that, to me, if there's a theme from this situation, it's pretty clearly this, is I believe, I hate to say this, like, I don't know the guy, but it feels to me like Billy Napier has lost his way. Okay. Producer Matt, do you have the pinned tweet on Billy Napier's Twitter account right now? So this is the pinned tweet from the day that Billy Napier agreed to be the Florida Gators football coach. He said, the culture precedes positive results. Champions behave like champions before they're champions. They have a winning standard of performance before they are winners. That's from the great Bill Walsh. And so why I pull up that tweet is because, in my opinion, Billy Napier has gotten so far away from who he is and what he's about. If you follow this guy's career at Louisiana Lafayette, and I know people don't like calling it Louisiana Lafayette, it's the University of Louisiana, whatever. But he was all about culture, culture, culture. It's about the student-athlete experience, and it's about this, and it's about that, and we're going to do this the right way, and we're going to build it from the ground up, whatever. And maybe that was his intention when he got to Florida with that first tweet. But ever since this guy got to Florida, all it's been about is NIL, NIL, NIL. And I get that we live in an NIL world, but I think he's kind of lost his way. It's funny. I even remember, like, before he coached his first game, I remember him doing some sort of press conference, and somebody asked him, they're like, the reports are that I think it was University of Texas. It's like every player at Texas is getting this much or that much or whatever. And he's like, actually, that number's wrong. It's actually significantly higher. And I remember that striking me in the moment of like, wait a second now. This guy's worried about what's going on everywhere else instead of worrying about what's in his program. And what we are seeing now is the results. And what we are seeing is one of the worst coaching performances ever relative to the school that he is at. So as an example, this is what Billy Napier has done in his first 2 years at Florida, okay? Went 6-7 in year 1, 5-7 in year 2. That doesn't sound that bad until you realize this. Florida had never had back-to-back losing seasons since the 1970s before Billy Napier arrived. Now, in his defense, he took over a bad situation from Dan Mullen. They actually were under 500 the year before he got there. So Florida is in the midst of its first 3-year situation where they're under 500 since the 1940s, okay? But the first time back-to-back seasons under the same head coach since the 1940s as well. They went under 500 in back-to-back seasons, but that was during a coaching change in the 70s. So just from that context, Florida is historically bad under Billy Napier. But from there, there's being bad, and then there's being bad in the manner in which he's been, which is both historically bad on the field, but also embarrassing off it, okay? Because I sent out a tweet on Wednesday when this story, or Tuesday when this story broke. Producer Matt, do you have my tweet from the other day? So this tweet I sent out, I think we got it here. Give me 1 second. We'll get it loaded up. But essentially, I put out a tweet. I said, I think this is the worst regime one of the worst regimes that I can ever remember. And I got some pushback and people were mad. And I don't think we have the tweet, but there it is. It's okay. Well, the College Football Report basically paraphrased my tweet. But long story short is, and I dropped something here. Give me half a second. But the long and the short of it is that you can see the tweet here. And producer Matt, you can go ahead and drop it. I thank you for that. But when you look at this regime, it is not just the win-loss record, but it's the manner in which they are losing games, okay? So it's not just that Florida's losing games. It's that they're every time they lose, it is in the most embarrassing fashion possible, okay? It's in the most embarrassing fashion possible. Go back to last year. Think about the losses. What were Florida's losses? You lose opening night at Utah. Remember, Utah's a third-string quarterback. That's not the bad part. But you lose on a crucial play in which you only have 10 men on the field in special teams. You lose to Kentucky. That's not embarrassing. Kentucky has improved its program. But Ray Davis rushes for 280 yards against you in that game. 9.5 yards per carry. Kentucky averages 10 yards per carry in that game. You lose to Arkansas. Remember, Arkansas fired Dan Enos, their offensive coordinator, a week before. They have a bye. They come out of their bye. They beat Florida in the swamp, okay? So we think, oh, maybe Arkansas has turned their corner. No, they lost every game after that. They got blown out by Auburn a week later. And so you start looking at these losses. It's not just that Florida is under 500, but think about these losses. You get destroyed by Kentucky. You lose to Arkansas at home, the first time Arkansas has ever won in the swamp. Oh, by the way, it was their only SEC win. They got destroyed a week later. By the way, LSU, remember the LSU game? That was basically the game that Jaden Daniels basically won the Heisman Trophy. That was the game that Jaden Daniels had, and this is going to sound like a made-up stat, but it's factually accurate. 606 yards of total offense for Jaden Daniels in the win by LSU against Florida. You have on top of that, by the way, you lose to Florida State, good team, but third-string quarterback at home. That's not totally embarrassing, but that's a game you probably should have. So I could go on and on. But the point is, you're losing on the field in embarrassing fashion. By the way, 2 years before you get blown out by Oregon State in a bowl game, you lose to Vandy in Billy Napier's first year. And so it's like, where are the good wins? Like, where is anything positive? But then on top of that, you're embarrassing off the field too. Like, it's one thing if you just don't have a very good product, but you can tell that the organization and everything is going in the right direction off the field. That is not the case at Florida. Remember, before National Signing Day a year ago, this past year, so December of 2023, remember, Florida got to as high as number 3 in the recruiting rankings. Then they lost like 4, 5, 6 marquee players right before signing day. Nasir Johnson, defensive tackle, was committed to Florida, flips to Georgia. Jamonte Waller was committed to Florida, flips to Auburn. Flipped to Auburn, by the way, during a Florida game. I seem to remember Hugh Freeze kind of going to the press conference, giving a wink, wink, nod, nod, something good is coming. Amaris Williams, 4-star defensive lineman, flips from Florida to Auburn. Wardell Mack, defensive back, flips from Florida to Texas. Xavier Filsamy, that was the kid's name. Wardell Mack was another kid, I believe, that flipped earlier in the cycle. But I just bring it up because it is just so embarrassing. And it's not just that you're losing on the field, but you're embarrassing off the field. Now you're getting sued by a former recruit. It just speaks to me like total chaos. By the way, when I put out that I believe this is one of the worst tenures ever, people started throwing names at me like Butch Jones, Jeremy Pruitt, Ron Zook, whatever. You know, Butch Jones had a 9-win season. You know, Jeremy Pruitt, for all his faults, had an 8-win season at Tennessee. You know that Ron Zook actually had back-to-back 8-win seasons at Florida. By the way, split an SEC East title. By the way, at least he signed a number 1 recruiting class that set up Urban Meyer for a championship run a few years later. So listen, I could go on and on. This isn't bash Billy Napier day, but you just talk about embarrassing. It doesn't get much more embarrassing than being sued by a recruit. Things are not good in the swamp. All right, that's what I want to do. Take a quick break, come back. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit. We're going back to the portal. I know what you think. Torres, there's no more portal talk to be had. But the NBA draft deadline is next week, meaning anybody that's in the portal is either staying in the NBA draft, going pro. We're going to come back, discuss all that. Quick break. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. I am back. Gonna be back. I do want to go ahead and switch gears. And I actually do want to get back to basketball. And I know what you're thinking. First of all, you're thinking probably as I look at myself on camera, probably thinking, Torres, you need a haircut. I agree. I need one. Plan is to get one by the end of this week. Okay. But besides my bad hair, I do want to talk a little basketball because I think it's an interesting time on the calendar. Okay. Because ultimately I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, there's no more basketball portal news to discuss. And in general, I pretty much agree with you, but I will say that there is one little caveat that is at least worth discussing. And that caveat is this, is that today, as I'm recording, is Wednesday, May 22nd, okay? Why that is a significant date is that because we are officially 1 week away from the NBA draft deadline. What that means is a week from now, any players who have college eligibility left, next Wednesday, May 29th, that'll probably be our last show before I go on vacation, they have to either announce that they are staying in the draft or returning to college basketball. And so it becomes sort of a thing. You know, there's plenty of guys, and maybe we do a segment on Thursday about the guys that have big decisions. Alex Caravan from UConn is one. Caleb Love from Arizona is one. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we'll talk about the guys that could return to college in general. But I also want to right now focus on the transfer portal, because there are several players that are testing the NBA draft waters that could, in theory, still come back to college basketball, that are in the portal and could switch teams. And so we've talked about some of these guys more than others, but what I want to do is a quick portal update focusing on guys in the NBA draft that could come back. And if there's any real recruiting buzz about them, for some of these guys, there is certainly some more than others. Let's focus on probably the biggest name in the portal that is also still in the NBA draft. That is Coleman Hawkins from Illinois. We've talked about him a lot. If you are not a diehard college basketball fan, if you just focus on your specific school and your specific school is not Illinois, you probably know a little bit about this kid. But one thing I would say about him, don't let the stats totally fool you. 6'10" forward, just finished his fourth year at Illinois. Averaged 12 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists per game, 37% shooting from three. Now, I know what people say, oh, that's not that impressive. It's not that big of a deal. Well, first of all, he dealt with tendonitis all year long. And two, he was pretty clearly like the second best player on a team that won the Big Ten tournament, finished second in the Big Ten regular season, and made the Elite Eight. He is a very good college basketball player, had some incredible games, including 30 points against Iowa, 20-7 against Minnesota, 22 against Northwestern on the road, 22-13, 21-10 against Michigan. So he is a very good college basketball player. He is in the NBA draft. He's trending as a second round pick to potentially undrafted. And so I think of everybody, there is frankly probably more than anyone, he is a guy that really is on the fence because he can come back and make really good money in NIL, but he also might just be done with college basketball. But what's interesting about him, and this is what I find fascinating about the Coleman Hawkins situation, is that I think there are times that basically, a kid enters the transfer portal and he kind of does it to protect himself, and he's not really planning on coming back to college basketball. We'll get to a couple of those guys in a minute. What's interesting about Coleman Hawkins is that when he entered the portal, I do think there was a belief from people in basketball circles, okay, he's just protecting himself, but he's not coming back to college basketball. Then he's done a few interviews since he entered the portal. And I'll tell you this, I think there's actually a very good chance he's coming back to college basketball, but here's the twist. He has basically said he is not going back to Illinois. He's basically said, look, they've rebuilt their roster, assuming that I'd be gone. And I don't think it's really fair to them, to the players that were brought in to replace me, if I just show up, I'm back, and I take all your minutes. So it feels like Coleman Hawkins, if he comes back, and I would say probably more than 60-40 that he does come back, that he is going to come back and not go back to Illinois, which sets up a fascinating, essentially free agency period. In terms of his recruitment, listen, I think there are two schools that really stand out to me in terms of who would essentially be the favorites to get him. The first one, I do think North Carolina. Listen, North Carolina is desperate for another big. Now, he isn't the traditional back-to-the-basket big that is going to, dump the ball down to him, a Hunter Dickinson and Armando Bacot or whatever. But they just need another big body, and they seem to be very active and very focused on getting one. It's worth noting they've raised a bunch of NIL money that has not been spent. Remember, when Cliff Omoyori committed to Alabama, the reports were that North Carolina actually had the bigger NIL offer, but Omoyori saw himself as the missing piece for a championship team at Alabama and reportedly took less money. So North Carolina needs another big body, has the NIL money. Now, again, I think in a perfect world, they would love a more traditional 5-man. I think he's more of a stretch 5 that's really better as a 4. He can play a small ball 5, but probably is better as a 4. But I think North Carolina has to be deemed the favorite. The other team that I think is getting a lot of buzz with Coleman Hawkins, it is the Arkansas Razorbacks. At Arkansas, and we're going to talk about DJ Wagner here momentarily, but Arkansas, I believe, basically right now they're still only at 7 players, right? And I think that I actually like the front court pieces that they have. Jonas Adu and Big Z at the 5. Adu Thiero, I think, is better as a small ball 4 than he is as a 3. That also opens up the fact for Carter Knox to play the 3 spot. But of course, Coach Cal, he's going to go big game hunting. And there's real buzz that if Coleman Hawkins comes back to college, that Arkansas could be a fit there. Again, I would rather see Adu at the 4 and Carter Knox at the 3. I think in that case, you would play Coleman Hawkins at the 4 and Adu at the 3. But there's a lot of buzz with Arkansas. There was some Louisville buzz. I think Louisville's just running out of spots, man. They took the Kayshawn Pryor kid, big man from USF that can stretch the floor, shoot threes. They also just took Frank Anselm, who ironically was actually Coleman Hawkins' high school teammate at Prolific Prep, but Frank Anselm from Georgia. So I don't really think that Louisville is a threat anymore. I would put it at a North Carolina versus Arkansas situation. And I would probably give the edge to North Carolina right now. Obviously, Arkansas is not getting outbid, but North Carolina needs a big guy. And so I would be curious to see if North Carolina is the favorite if he decides to come back. Really quickly, let me send out a tweet here. Forgive me. All right, so let's get back to it. So Coleman Hawkins is probably, in my opinion, the biggest name. Let's get to another really interesting name that I do think is actually trending towards North Carolina, and that is a player that I think a lot of people will be familiar with on this show. That is a gentleman named Agana Onyenso. Okay, so Agana Onyenso played at Kentucky these past 2 years. Developmental kid, dealt with an injury, hurt his foot last offseason, so his development was stunted. But at the end of the day, he's kind of a limited, back to the basket kind of center. Average 5 points, about 6 boards, and this is the interesting part, about 3 blocks per game in 18 minutes of play. So credit to him because he is a true athlete and rim protector, not a great offensive player, but he's one, he entered the NBA draft, and the insinuation at the time was like, he's entering the draft and he ain't coming back. But he has obviously gone through the draft process, and it feels like, just with the economics of college basketball, that it makes it a little bit more likely that he could come back. Told Adam Zagori at the NBA Draft Combine that probably about 6-7 schools still involved. Oklahoma was in the mix. He listed Bama. Bama doesn't have a spot for him. He's not going to Bama. But I think North Carolina is the other one. I think North Carolina is going to end up with either Agana Onyenso or Coleman Hawkins. Even if Coleman Hawkins doesn't come back, I think Onyenso would make sense there. But like I said, they just need another big guy. They need a 5. And so in my opinion, I would expect Agana Onyenso to end up at North Carolina. Believe Georgetown is involved as well. Now, Agana Onyenso is not a guy that's going to play like 32 minutes a game. But I will say, I think if he's playing 10, 12 minutes a game as either a starting center that you kind of sub out or a backup center or a rim protector, I think he has a lot of value. We'll be curious if he ends up at North Carolina. A couple names that we haven't really talked about on this show, and they're both guys that I think could end up staying in the draft. I do want to hit on them really quick because I've got a few questions on them. Jalen Wells from Washington State and Cam Christie from Minnesota. So Jalen Wells, a fascinating story. So he started at D2 Sonoma State University. Okay, for people who don't know Sonoma, it's in Arizona, not to be confused, or Sedona is in Arizona. Sonoma is in California. And Sonoma is known for one thing, and it ain't basketball. It's wine country. It's like peak wine country. And so when I picture this kid, he played at Sonoma State, ended up going to Washington State this past year. But when I picture this kid at Sonoma State, I just envision him almost in like a field of dreams, like he's playing in a basketball gym that's in the middle of a wine field or whatever. But he goes to Washington State this year, and he was excellent. 13 points per game, 42% three-point shooting, a 6'8" forward. And he had maybe his best game in Washington State's biggest game, 27 points in a win over Arizona. So this kid can play at the highest level. I really like him. I think he's actually very good. I don't know that he's coming back to college basketball, though. Very interesting player. I think I actually saw an interview with him at the NBA Draft Combine where he said, look, I'm not even personally fielding calls right now. I'm letting my agent handle all that. It's not my spot. I'm focused on the NBA draft. If I don't like the draft process, then I will start the process when I come back to college. He's a really good player. I started putting together my top 100 players that have been in the portal all offseason. I think he's like a top 15 guy. Another top 15 guy in the portal that I just don't think is coming back to college basketball. Have not talked about him this spring. Cam Christie from Minnesota. Interesting story. Brother was a one-and-done player at Michigan State, now plays with the Los Angeles Lakers. And Cam Christie was really good in college basketball for a bad team that not a lot of people watched. He played at Minnesota, averaged 11.5 points per game as a freshman, and as a 6'8" forward, shot like 39% from three. So 11 points per game, 39% from three in the Big Ten as a freshman. That's a dude that could play. We can make fun of the Big Ten. You average 11.5 per game, 38% or 39% from three as a freshman, you can play. So very good player. But like I said, right now there is no real buzz on him coming back to college. I would expect him to ultimately stay in the NBA draft. He is a guy that is on draft boards. Coleman Hawkins is kind of that fringe. Is he going to get drafted? Is he not going to get drafted? Jalen Wells, kind of that fringe. Is he going to get drafted? Is he not going to get drafted? I think if Cam Christie stays in, he will get drafted. Now, again, maybe the NIL money's good. Maybe you can go someplace and have an impact right away. I would expect him to be drafted. A couple other names, guys we've talked about. Listen, Jackson Robinson, I don't believe as of this moment that there is some new update that we are not aware of. I've said it from the beginning. Played 4 years of college basketball, got his degree. I think in a perfect world, he would like to stay in the NBA draft. We're waiting to see if he's good enough to get drafted. And if he is, I think he's going to stay in the NBA draft. If he isn't, then I think he's coming back to college, and I think Kentucky should be deemed the favorite. Now, I think there was some miscommunication on this show a few days ago because I saw some people saying that Torres said that he's going to BYU if he comes back. That's not what I said at all. What I said was, I think BYU is in a better spot than people realize. NBA head coach comes from the NBA, was a lead assistant for the Phoenix Suns. They're going to run an NBA system, and they have plenty of NIL money, okay? Plenty of NIL money. And so I think BYU is in better shape than people realize, but I would still say Kentucky's the favorite. Go there, be the star, biggest stage in college basketball. Mark Pope turned you into an all Big 12 player, but ultimately I do still think he is a guy that is probably going to stay in the draft if he thinks he'll get drafted. The good news is, again, we will see in the coming days. Chaz Lanier, I don't think there's any real update on Chaz Lanier either. Took his visit to Tennessee. Feels like it's sort of trending more towards Tennessee than it is for Kentucky. Maybe there's been a commitment. I've been on air for over close to an hour now. I don't know if there's been a commitment since then. Feels like it's maybe trending a little bit towards Tennessee. I said it the other day with BYU, same deal. I don't think BYU's in the mix. I think they think they're a distant third, but NIL money is not going to be an issue. But Chaz Lanier, we freaking led the show with Chaz Lanier the other day. That's how slow that Monday show was. But Chaz Lanier is one of the big names still in there. 19 points per game, 44% three-point shooting. And I think he is very good, but we will see what happens with him. All right, one other name in the portal that I do want to get to. And it's a guy we have talked about quite a bit. And it's a guy that I certainly get questions about every day. And that player is DJ Wagner. And so Arkansas fans, I think about 2-3 times a day, I get asked about the status of DJ Wagner. So I want to go ahead and give an update on DJ Wagner, but I also bluntly want to be honest with Arkansas fans because I don't want you to get mad at me in the comment section. I don't really think there is a real tangible update, but since you guys ask me about him every day, let's at least talk about him for a few minutes, but don't get mad if I don't give you any new information. There's no late breaking news. There's nothing really to share on DJ Wagner, but ultimately what I would say is this. I do believe at the end of the day, he is going to end up being an Arkansas Razorback, and I think what's interesting about DJ Wagner is that this isn't a kid like Coleman Hawkins or Jalen Wells or whoever, he did not enter the NBA draft. And so because he did not enter the NBA draft, it's not like he could just go pro, maybe get drafted, maybe not, start in the G League. He's got to come back to college basketball unless he wants to go play overseas. He cannot enter the NBA draft. So he's in the portal. I believe he's going to end up at Arkansas. But let's talk a little bit about him and what a time frame looks like and what a potential update could possibly be. First off, and I've said this a million times, so this part is a little bit repetitive, but I think it's worth noting. I really like DJ Wagner, man. I don't remember a player in recent college basketball that I think has gotten a worse rap relative to how he played than DJ Wagner. So DJ Wagner, as a freshman in college basketball in the SEC, and I understand that he was at one point the number one ranked recruit in America. I get that. When you have that number one next to your name, people expect a Paolo Banchero, a Cade Cunningham, a John Wall, and Anthony Davis. Not every guy is that, though, and it's okay. But DJ Wagner, as a freshman, averaged just under 10 points per game, averaged 3.5 assists per game as a freshman playing in the brutal SEC. It's also worth noting, he got hurt really about early SEC play. He comes back, Rob Dillingham's blown up, Reed Shepherd's blown up, he's not healthy. And so it was this weird dynamic where other guys are blowing up, his season isn't going to plan, and I give him credit. He stuck with the course, he was a good teammate, and I think you give him an offseason, he's comfortable in college basketball, you let him get healthy, I think he has a chance to be really good. Now, in terms of, is he going to go pro or is he going to go to Arkansas? Is he not? What's the deal? Why is there no update? I'm just going to tell you, like, I don't think, to me, the fact that he hasn't committed yet is a big deal. First off, I'll be blunt. He doesn't really have anywhere else to go. And we've talked about this, but like, think about all the schools that would need a player the caliber of DJ Wagner. Kentucky's not going to take him. They got Lamont Butler and Kirk Creason. St. John's isn't going to take him. They got Kadari Richmond. Tennessee has Zakai Ziegler. Even USC, like, he took a visit to USC. USC has Desmond Claude, okay? Desmond Claude was a commitment from Xavier, who I believe is like one of the best guards that has entered the portal. Desmond Claude this year played at Xavier. He averaged 16 points per game this year at Xavier. And so he committed to USC, and he is going to have the ball in his hands at USC. He's a guy that needs the ball in his hands to be successful. So even USC, the other place that DJ Wagner visited, there's not really a spot for him. There was some Florida buzz for a minute. Billy Napier screwed that up. No, I'm just kidding. No, that wasn't on Billy Napier. But they took Elijah Martin from Florida Atlantic. And if you look at Elijah Martin's commitment statement, he was told that he's going to play point guard there. So there's no good option outside of Arkansas. There's the obvious ties, which we have talked about. Obviously, ties to John Calipari. His dad played for John Calipari. His grandfather, Milt Wagner, played with Kenny Payne at Louisville. Milt Wagner was on Kenny Payne's staff at Louisville. If you want to go back in time, Milt Wagner was on John Calipari's staff at Memphis. And so you have the family ties. You have the basketball stuff. And I just don't know where he's going to go that makes sense at this point beyond going to Arkansas. And so I do think he's going to go to Arkansas. And I'm just going to say it. And if it makes me unpopular, I think he's going to be really good. I think he has a chance to be really good for the Razorbacks. And I do think he's kind of a missing piece because I look at the Arkansas situation, and I know anytime I say anything positive about the Razorbacks, oh, John Calipari stinks, and John Calipari's not going to win, and this and that and the other thing. It's okay. Okay, I get it. I understand your stance. But you look at the pieces at Arkansas. John L. Davis is really good. But John L. Davis isn't a point guard. John L. Davis isn't best when he has the ball in his hands creating for others. So I don't think John Calipari wants him to be the point guard. Boogie Fland could be a point guard, but as a true freshman in the SEC, do you want the ball in his hands? I don't think so. And so you get DJ Wagner, all the other pieces at Arkansas start to come together. Now John L. Davis can play off the ball and be very effective and be very good. Boogie Fland doesn't have to be a point guard in the SEC. Carter Knox can play on the wing. Billy Richmond can play on the wing. We'll see if they add more pieces like a Coleman Hawkins. But I think the bottom line is everything comes together when DJ Wagner commits. Don't know when it's going to be, but one thing, and I've said this consistently, DJ Wagner is not a look at me, I'm going to commit on your time frame kind of guy. He is the kind of guy, even when he committed out of high school, he's not a big social media guy. He doesn't have, he doesn't post 10 times a day on Instagram. When he committed out of high school, it wasn't here's my top 5, here's my top 3, Joe Tipton, make me a graphic. As a matter of fact, during his high school recruitment, it was kind of weird. It was kind of the opposite. It was kind of like nobody really knew what was going on. There was a moment in time where everybody thought he was going to Louisville. Then there was a moment in time where everybody thought he was going to Kentucky. Then it went dark for like 2 months. And then he ends up being a Kentucky Wildcat. So to me, I do believe DJ Wagner will end up being an Arkansas Razorback. I'll make a prediction. My guess is he commits sometime over the Memorial Day weekend. That's not inside information. That's not me wink, wink, nod, nod. I know it's coming. I just think for him, he's probably just, he's not, I don't think he's taking any more visits. There's no more good options. And I just think he's going to do it over the weekend where it's not a big deal, where he can just focus on basketball, where he can just come in and do his thing. Of course, keep in mind, players are starting to move into campus over the next couple weeks. So he's got to make a decision. My guess is he commits over the weekend. My guess is he ends up being an Arkansas Razorback. All right. Appreciate everybody's support. Great chat. Great chat. The chat is humming. Somebody said DJ committed to Arkansas. I have not seen that. So if that has happened, I apologize, but I have not seen that. So let's keep it going. I don't think he has, because I follow all the big Arkansas accounts and nobody has seemed to indicate that. So until further notice, we are going to pretend as though that has not happened. Really quickly, just a couple other odds and ends, as you can see on the screen here, and then we will get out of here. I just want to hit on a couple things I saw that I think are interesting. Before we get to your questions, I think we're going to do this going forward. It's just hit on a couple smaller stories that maybe aren't a whole segment, but I think are at least worth noting. There is one more college hoop story that I want to get to, then we'll get to some football stuff. But the college hoop story, I saw this. So John Rothstein reported. So conference realignment is here. The realignment era is here. And the Pac-12 is dead. You've probably heard. The Pac-12 is no more. And it's a shame. And one of the things that was lost is that Arizona and UCLA was a little bit down this year, but those two programs, really since Mick Cronin and Tommy Lloyd have gotten there, Arizona has always been good. UCLA has gotten good under Mick Cronin. But that rivalry was dead post Pac-12. But we found out from John Rothstein today on Wednesday that the rivalry is back, baby, as Arizona and UCLA are set to play in the 2024-25 season, the 25-26 season. They're going to skip 26-27 for reasons that remain to be seen. And then they'll get back into action in the winter of 27 into the 27-28 season. Here is the issue, though. According to John Rothstein, none of these games are going to be played on campus. Instead, the two teams will play in Phoenix in 2024, Las Vegas in 25, and what appears to be some sort of neutral court in 2027 in Los Angeles. And so let me go ahead and say this. I don't want to be complaining guy that complains about everything. And I am very grateful for the fact that we are getting what is a very good rivalry that is going to continue to be played. But can someone tell these coaches it's okay to actually play home and homes in college basketball in 2024, 2025? And I understand there are reasons that these games are played on neutral courts. Financially, you can split the money rather than one team getting all the gate, whatever. And from Arizona's perspective, it doesn't really change anything because basically their whole arena is sold out every single year. So I get financially, it's kind of, it makes more sense for both schools. And by the way, from the net ranking, a win on the road or a win at home versus a win on a neutral court, the neutral court win looks better. But guys, can we just get a couple big games on home courts? Now, I know Arizona is actually playing Duke this year in Tucson, but this is a game that is tailor-made for home and homes. Because at the end of the day, a couple things. One, you're going to sell tickets. Even if it's UCLA at home, they might go to a lot of Arizona fans, but you know you're going to sell tickets. And so why are we not doing this on true home courts? It makes sense for both sides. For Arizona, again, you get a home game against a great opponent, UCLA. But also, worth noting, when you play at UCLA, it's going to be all your fans. So you basically get a home game either way. And then from the UCLA perspective, you're going to be playing 10 road games in the Big Ten, plus the Big Ten tournament next year. You're going to be playing somewhere between 11 and 14 games in the Eastern and Central time zones. So maybe you want another home game so you don't have to get on another plane. I just am so tired. And I get it. We're getting some great home and homes. But what I can tell, how about this? I'm wearing the Kansas shirt right now that I bought when I went to Fog Allen Fieldhouse this year. UConn played at Kansas. It was unbelievable. It was one of the best atmospheres I've ever been in college basketball. 2 nights before that, I was in Fayetteville for the Duke-Arkansas game. And it's just like, why are we eliminating all of these home courts? Now, I understand if you're Mississippi State and you have the opportunity to play Arizona, but Arizona won't come to your home court, and so you got to play them in Phoenix or something like that. Okay, I get it. But these are 2 teams that should be playing on their home courts. It drives me crazy. I don't even know if I'm making my point well, but it is so annoying that we cannot get any games in home and home venues. Couple other notes. Let's go back to football. First off, did you see the story that apparently TNT will be getting some college football playoff games next year? Remember, college football playoff expands. We'll have the 4 games in that opening round. We'll have 4 quarterfinal games, 2 semifinals, and a final. And so it is announced on Wednesday that TNT is actually going to get some of those games. And that's an interesting announcement for a few reasons. First of all, when we talked about the playoff expansion, the one thing that seemed like it was going to happen was that, so when we talk playoff expansion, part of the whole thing, this was when Kevin Warren was the commissioner of the Big Ten. It was like, we got to get different networks involved. The way to get the most money is to get all these different networks involved and blah, 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 and this and that. And so it was very surprising to me when the college football playoff was announced and it was all on ESPN. Now, at the same time, there was the opportunity for ESPN to license out. In other words, they own it, but they're going to basically rent the game to you on another network. And so that's where ESPN is going to make some of their money back. And so I'm not surprised this is going to happen because we knew all of the games were not going to be on ESPN because, frankly, financially, I don't think it makes very much sense. I'm not going to nerd out about, finances and all that stuff, but we know that the ESPN is about to way overpay for the NBA here in the coming weeks. We know the NBA contract's up. ESPN's in the process of getting back the NBA, the finals, conference finals, whatever. So they're going to have to overpay for that. They're going to have to overpay for the college football playoff. So you knew they were going to sub-license a couple of these games to other networks. And it kind of makes sense. I think they'll get to pick which games they want on their networks, which means that if, Tulane is the group of 5 representative and they're playing Washington, that's a game that maybe is not going to do a great rating, and they could just put it on TNT. They could just say, TNT, this is the game you get. So that's the interesting part. I think what the other interesting part is this. Who the heck is going to be broadcasting that game on TNT? Because TNT obviously doesn't have the infrastructure to cover college football. As best as I know, they don't have any college football that I'm aware of. So then it becomes a question of, do they sub-license a crew? Do they somehow get whatever, Gary Danielson and Brad Nessler from CBS? That I don't know. By the way, I saw the jokes on Twitter, but I don't think it's that crazy. Grab the inside the NBA crew. The inside the NBA crew is going bye-bye. Bring them in to call a few college football games. So anyway, thought it was interesting that we were getting the college football playoff on TNT. It's surprising just because they don't really have the infrastructure to call these games. So again, where does the crew come from? What games do they get? I actually think strategically, I've been critical of ESPN, including ESPN, by the way. How the hell are JJ Redick and Doris Burke your lead NBA team? I tweeted it out the other day and people loved it. But I think this is actually strategically smart from ESPN. I think they do a lot of dumb stuff like getting rid of Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson when you have the NBA Finals, but think this makes sense. One more college football scheduling note, and it was announced by, and listen, I work for Fox Sports Radio. I sort of sometimes get privy to stuff that may be happening over on the Fox lot that is in Culver City, California. I work in Sherman Oaks, but I had heard that there was going to be a Friday night college football package coming. And as it turns out, that's exactly what happened. It was announced on Wednesday that we are getting Friday night college football. Now, they're not going to be the main games, but it'll be a Big Ten game every Friday night in addition to all the big noon games. And then the CBS and NBC have games anyway. So first of all, that's not surprising because remember, Fox, CBS, and NBC all have standalone games in the Big Ten. So they're going to get the first choice. But then from there, the other games will be played, and there'll be a Friday night game on Fox. Producer Matt, do you have the Fox schedule? Let me see if I can see this on the screen here. Producer Matt will pop it up. So it's not the sexiest games from the Big Ten perspective. Illinois, Nebraska, Washington, Rutgers, Michigan State, Oregon, Northwestern Maryland, Oregon, Purdue, Rutgers, USC. That was the one that seemed to get people fired up. We're going to get a Rutgers USC game that kicks off at 11 p.m. Eastern time. So whatever remains of the Rutgers fan base by that point in the season will have to wait until 11 p.m. Eastern for their kickoff. But I'll just say this. I mean, I have no big takes. Like one, well, I do have a couple. First of all, everyone's complaining about that Friday night Rutgers USC game. Tickets are cheap. I work all day Saturday. Your boy Torres might swing out to that game because I haven't been to USC game in forever because they only play on Saturdays. I do radio on Saturdays. But two, ultimately, I guess I'm not that surprised because ultimately, you know what I was thinking? Pro sports, and you could drop that schedule, Producer Matt. Thank you. Sports in general, pro and college, is basically keeping cable TV alive, isn't it? Like you think about it. NBA, finals, playoffs, whatever. First of all, even this year, they moved a lot of those Wednesday night ESPN games to ABC. Now, part of it was the writer's strike, whatever. A lot of those games went to ABC. Finals are on ABC. Some Monday night games have gone to ABC. Now you have Friday night college football. By the way, NBC is bringing on the NBA, and part of it is they're going to have like a midweek Wednesday, Thursday game on NBC. And it's because like nobody watches, network television anymore. By the way, Sunday night football, Saturday night college football on NBC. So I just find it interesting is that basically every night on one of the traditional networks, network TV, is going to have sports going forward. Monday Night Football, many weeks, is going to be on ABC. You're going to have a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday NBA game. I don't know which on NBC. You're going to have Friday night college football. You're going to have Saturday night college football. You're going to have Sunday night NFL football. It is what it is. All right. Let me ask you this, Producer Matt. Do we have any questions? I saw the chat kind of devolve into an Arkansas-Kentucky hate fest again. Do we have any questions before we get out of here? Oh, we got some college baseball. Let me ask you this. To the crowd that's watching, let me ask you a question. If I could get my buddy Phil Elson on, who is the Arkansas baseball play-by-play voice, I know nothing about college baseball, but if I just kind of laid up to him and let him do all the work, and I basically said, Phil, tell me about college baseball, would people want a college baseball segment on this show? Phil Elson's a buddy of mine. He's the Arkansas play-by-play voice. If you want college baseball, let me know. Other than that, I don't think there's very many good questions. Somebody says, yes, let's get Phil. We got all sorts of other good stuff. We got a lot of baseball in the chat. I like it. I like that we got baseball. And yes, Phil is great. I see a couple people saying get Phil. Phil is great. I am going to try to get Phil on this show here in the coming days. All right. So we just got a question. Producer Matt, pop it up again. I apologize. What overseas guys for Arkansas? So I did an update on this. And again, it's another one. People got mad because I gave an update and there really isn't an update. I don't think there's much of an update. Okay. So late last week, I think it was Trilly Donovan was the first one that had it, was that Arkansas, in pursuit of trying to figure out their roster for 2024, 2025, was pursuing two of the best players that are European that are not yet draft eligible. In other words, players that are 17, 18, whatever, that could play in Europe next year, but also could come to the United States. And so the two players were Nolan Traore, a point guard from France, and also Igor Demin, a guard / forward, kind of a wing from Russia. And so I did a little bit of an update last week, getting a little toasty here in the Torres compound. But so I did an update on YouTube about this. So this is what I can tell you. So first of all, what I can tell you is this. I don't think Nolan Traore is coming to play in the States. He took 3 visits over the course of the winter time to Alabama, Gonzaga, and Xavier. Since then, he's actually kind of blown up, even more so than he had previously. And I just don't think it makes much sense for him to come to the States. He went through the recruiting process a few months ago, did not commit. And I just don't think that he's going to then start the process over again of the re-recruiting process, especially this late in the summer. And it's also worth noting, I believe he's in the middle of his pro team playoffs. So my guess is he's going to stay in Europe. I had also heard a little buzz that is it possible he could go to that Australia Next Stars program, which is basically like the old G League Ignite. It's a pro thing, but they teach you financial literacy. There's kind of a financial, it's a cool program. Alex Sarr, who many believe is going to be the number 1 pick in the NBA draft this year, is from France and went to that program. So I think that one's possible. Now, the more interesting one is Igor Demin, 6'8", guard-ish, guy from Russia. So his recruitment has been fascinating because a few weeks ago, reports start to come out that Illinois is kind of interested in him. Then Illinois cools off and BYU starts to get involved. Then BYU cools off and it was an Arkansas thing. And there's actually some people that really felt like we might get an Igor Demin Arkansas commitment in these next couple days. Now, I'm not there yet. What I can tell you is that as of late last week, I think BYU felt pretty good about Igor Demin. Now, what's complicated about him and what's complicated about every international kid is a couple things. One, it's not really NIL, but guys are under contract. And we talked about it with our buddy Billy Napier. Guys are under contract, and it's not always easy to get these guys out of European contracts. With Igor Demin as well, I think the academic component might be a little bit complicated. And what I can tell you is I talked to a few people that have recruited international guys, and what they've said is every guy is a little bit different. Like that Nolan Traore kid I just mentioned, he goes to a place that's very, what's the right way to say it? Like credible, I guess is the right way to put it. He goes to a very credible place in France. And basically, if he wants to play college basketball, the grades are in order. There's a school element to it, whatever, but not everybody is like that. And so Big Z kind of had this issue last year. I know Big Z was a little bit different because Big Z, first couldn't get into Kentucky. Kentucky's admissions gave him a hard time, and then the NCAA did. So with Igor Demin, I think more than anything, I think that it wouldn't be an Arkansas admissions thing. It would be a NCAA thing. So that's why I'm a little bit hesitant. But what I will tell you is if Arkansas gets this kid eligible and they get a commitment, I mean, he's a stud. I mean, Jonathan Gavoni has him as a top 10 pick in the 2025 NBA draft. So imagine getting like a McDonald's All-American, top 5, top 10 talent this late in the process. That is the update on those two guys. I don't know that I feel great about either of them. Igor Demin, I feel better. But like I said, I've seen some people say that they think it's done. I'm not quite sure that we're quite there yet. Anything else before we get out of here, producer Matt? I think that might be it for today's show. So first of all, appreciate the positivity on getting our buddy Phil Elson on this show because Phil is the man. And I love Phil. And so we might try to get Phil on this show next week to talk a little college baseball because I am not the guy to do it. So we'll see if Phil Elson comes on. But I'll tell you what, I think I'm going to get out of here. Minute 10, an hour 10 of quality content. I think it's time for me to go. If you're not subscribed to the show, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure you're subscribed. By the way, do me a quick favor. Make sure to follow. By the way, do me a favor. Go on Instagram, Aaron Torres Pod. Follow me there. Need a bigger Instagram following? You guys tell me you love me. If you love Torres, Instagram.com/Aaron Torres Pod. We also have the Aaron Torres Pod on TikTok. Also, if you're not subscribed on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and put on all your notifications so you know when we're going live. I think the plan this week, we will do one more show on Thursday. Obviously, we'll be off Friday, Saturday, probably Sunday unless there's late breaking news. And maybe we do something Monday. We'll see. I can't promise next week because next week's just going to be a weird week because of the Memorial Day holiday. I go on vacation next Thursday, but I'm going to pre-record some stuff that you'll have for the following week. So if you're not subscribed, make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to your shows. Make sure to rate and review the show. Make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. All for today's show. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode, same time, same place. Appreciate your